Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. We are glad that you can join us to reflect today on the final evaluation findings of the ProWash Award. If you're just joining, please go ahead and click Interpretation at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, and then you can select the language you would like to hear. When you do that, you can also mute the original audio or listen to it at a lower volume. We'd also like to ask you to rename yourself on Zoom with your name and organization or the name of your Resilience Food Security activity. We'll give you a minute or so to do this, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Great, thank you again for joining us. Likely, if you're attending this event, you are very aware of what ProWash is, so I'm not going to take too much time in introducing the project. Just to say that my name is Nicole Weber, and I'm the director of ProWash. ProWash is a USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance funded capacity strengthening, learning, and applied research activity. We support implementing partners to strengthen their WASH and integrated water resource management work in support of food security and nutrition outcomes. ProWash began in 2018 and will wrap up in early 2023. Earlier this year, we commissioned Causal Design to undertake an external evaluation of ProWash. In today's session, we will hear from Causal Design on the results of the final evaluation. We then will discuss the findings and be getting your input and thoughts through using the polling features in AHA Slides, and we will also be having a few small brainstorming sessions around the different findings. So the overall goals of today's event are to share the top-line findings of the ProWash final evaluation with the broader WASH and food security communities. We will discuss how findings resonate to others who are carrying out capacity strengthening, learning, and research efforts. We will also hear from you your ideas on being implementer-led, on convening and collaboration, and on localization. I'm now going to introduce you to Ms. Amanda Bangura, who is the co-principal investigator on the final evaluation. She will provide the overall framing and methodology of the evaluation and top-line findings on governance, coordination, and localization. If you have any questions during her presentation, please go ahead and drop them in the chat box. I'll turn it over to you now, Amanda.
Thank you, Nicole, and hello to everyone joining from across the globe. I won't say good afternoon or good morning, as I know we're all in very different time zones. As Nicole said, my name is Amanda Bangura. I was the co-principal investigator for Causal Design for the end-line evaluation of the ProWash Associate Award. I'll be speaking to you today, as Nicole said, about the methodology we employed and some top-line findings and recommendations. I am aware that we have translation, so I will pause at the end of each slide to give the translator time to catch up. Thank you. Next slide, please. So to begin with, we can speak briefly of the overall learning questions that we were presented with by ProWash for this evaluation. ProWash sought to undertake a learning-focused evaluation, looking at the processes that they had employed to deliver on the Associate Award. So the evaluation sought to be learning-focused, systematic, and of course, objective. The key questions we were provided with could be categorized in 4 main areas. The first area was around the award design and the objectives of the award. Secondly, we were looking at implementing partner engagement and the impacts of technical assistance and influence that ProWash had, primarily for RIFSAs. We also sought to look at outreach to implementing partners and the processes that ProWash had engaged with to reach out to partners. Finally, we looked at thought leadership and influence, primarily on USAID BHA policies, standards, and program quality. Our full report in time will be posted on the FSN network, and we will ensure that it is shared with all attendees. Next slide, please. For our evaluation methodology, we adopted a mixed methods approach. So we used both qualitative data and quantitative data, as well as undertaking a desk review of documentation provided by ProWash. For the qualitative data, we engaged in purposive sampling. So we sought to identify specific respondents based on criteria that we agreed with ProWash. And those criteria were the level of engagement that the implementing partner had with ProWash, the region or country that the implementing partner was delivering a RIFSA in, and the type of tools that they had engaged with. We were purposive because we had quite a small sample size, and we wanted to ensure we gained feedback from a range of different RIFSAs. We undertook 25 key informant interviews and focus group discussions, and that engaged a total of 38 respondents through the qualitative data collection. The data we gathered through the qualitative process was analysed in a platform called Atlas TI. For the quantitative data, we developed a survey instrument in partnership with Scale, ProWash, and Scale's evaluation firm, which was called Bodhi Global Analytics. That survey was then distributed across ProWash's networks, and those that sought or those that decided to respond were what we call a self-selected sample. That means that they opted in themselves. For ProWash, we gathered data from 178 respondents, and of those, 65 respondents provided very detailed feedback on learning resources or tools gained through ProWash. That data was then analysed in Starter, a software called Starter. Next slide, please. One of the key questions we asked to qualitative respondents was, what 3 words or phrases would you use to describe ProWash? Through that process, we gathered 80 words, and they're presented here in this word cloud. To us, these findings highlight the key perceptions of ProWash as collaborative, supportive, and technically sound. Implementing partners, co-associate award representatives, such as representatives of Scale and PCS, steering committee members, and USAID representatives invariably provided positive descriptions of Pro-WASH when answering this question. Interestingly, it was only the Pro-WASH team members who noted more constructive terms such as lack of clarity and busy. Next slide, please. Thank you. As Nicole noted, one of the key findings we want to reflect on today is that regarding the Pro-WASH's governance structures. Respondents provided some key strengths that they felt the steering committee of Pro-WASH had provided. Those included that the steering committee was able to highlight existing resources, that the steering committee had provided a soundboard to Pro-WASH for them to share ideas and provide feedback in specific technical areas. The steering committee was considered to have expanded Pro-WASH's network of partners and experts. And in some cases, steering committee members had been able to provide technical review and input on specific deliverables. There were some challenges, however, as noted in the green boxes. In our analysis of the data, we felt that these challenges derived primarily from a lack of clarity on the purpose of the steering committee. This resulted in challenges such as steering committee members having limited knowledge on key areas of Pro-WASH, including the kind of work they were doing, feedback from implementing partners, and the staffing structure and other areas. There was limited engagement reported between the steering committee and USAID. Some steering committee members felt that that limited their ability to provide strategic guidance. There was also, in some cases, a lack of clarity on the time expectations of steering committee members. And importantly for this discussion, there was a finding that the composition of the steering committee membership, meaning the people that were in the steering committee, may not have been the most appropriate people that could have provided strategic guidance. In our report, we discuss how these key findings relate to the aid localization agenda, whereby USAID and others are recognizing the need to be led by people involved in program delivery or people affected by program delivery in the countries in which they are delivered. On the steering committee, there were no representatives of nationals in which RIFSA programs were delivered, for example. It was quite USA-centric. Next slide, please. In order to respond to these findings, we included some key recommendations. Firstly, we suggested that Pro-WASH might want to consider the creation of a larger, what we called technical advisory group, which could be comprised of technical experts in the field who would be expected or anticipated to volunteer their time to review deliverables and provide technical guidance on strategy. From this technical advisory group, we suggested a steering committee could be elected or selected, which would have a more deliberate focus on governing the award. And that could include providing strategic direction and reviewing Pro-WASH's capacity to deliver on that strategy. Next slide, please. Another key area of finding related to what we refer to in the report as the added value of Pro-WASH, principally as a convener and a connector. respondents noted quite typically that ProWash had been able to bring people together, to support them to profile their work and to share learning. In terms of networking among RIFSers, ProWash was seen as a convener within and across countries. This function was typically noted by respondents to be beyond the faculty of individual IPs, meaning that as an individual INGO, it's often difficult to engage with, say, a WASH lead in a different INGO, or within one RIFSer, it may be difficult for a WASH lead to engage with another RIFSer, a WASH lead of another RIFSer. And there were many reasons for this, including time limitations and fast pace of work. But importantly, respondents noted that ProWash did support that process. Respondents also noted that ProWash supported them to profile their work. From the quantitative survey, 52% of respondents reported that ProWash had provided them an opportunity to share best or promising practice, or innovations. Examples included supporting RIFSers to present within ProWash hosted webinars and knowledge sharing events, inviting RIFSer WASH leads to co-facilitate online training sessions, supporting RIFSers to write technical briefs, and supporting respondents to submit abstracts to international conferences. Some respondents noted that ProWash's networks and reputation supported this process. They noted that ProWash as an entity, as a known entity and a respected entity, did mean that their network and experts were more likely to engage with work that they were the deliverables that they were working on. And this was seen as an opportunity for RIFSers to reach out to that network. Relatedly, although a little beyond the point of conveners and connectors, there were findings that noted that as a technical advisory service, that the team was generating delivery expertise in how to provide technical advisory support and how to engage experts in that provision. Respondents also noted or described ProWash as a mechanism that was staying alert and keeping their eyes above water and drawing the attention of RIFSers who typically were head down, focusing on the work they were delivering due to the fast pace of the delivery that they were engaged with. All of these factors were considered as added value of ProWash, with particular reference for this learning session on their role as conveners and connectors. Next slide, please. So these points relate specifically to the points I've shared just now about collaboration and convening. Next slide, please. The report discusses, as I noted earlier, issues relating to the aid localization agenda. And particularly, we felt that the data spoke to this agenda in two key areas. First, I've seen a comment that they can't hear me. Can others hear me, please? Nicole, could I ask for your support on that, please?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think it might be on their end.
Okay, thank you. I'll continue.
I can hear you.
Thank you. I'll continue. Thank you. As I was saying, there were two key areas which we felt spoke to the aid localization agenda. Firstly, program governance, as I mentioned earlier, and secondly, on the perception of implementing partners relating to relevance and utility. So I'll start there with the perception of the relevance and utility of support provided. With regards aid localization, this typically spoke to areas where the data suggested that ProWash had typically engaged international consultants whose technical specialisms were prioritized over their contextual understanding and experience. Some respondents noted appreciation of that approach because it meant that there would be new ideas brought to the RIFSA, or expertise that might not be available nationally was made available. Conversely, other respondents discussed cases in which that lack of contextual understanding led to broad recommendations, and that affected the utility of the deliverable. An example was provided by one respondent whereby a consultant created some tools in Excel, but the people the end-line users of those tools did not have access to a computer. And when it was requested that those tools be turned into an Android-focused system, that request was not met at the time of data collection. So that's an example of where the lack of contextual knowledge led to a tool that was not utilizable. There were other examples provided whereby the language abilities of consultants meant that they were not able to speak directly to field staff, and therefore the tools and resources that they provided were not as utilizable by those field staff had they been able to engage directly. So in our reading of that data, we aligned that to the aid localization agenda in terms of a debate about shifting the focus to local areas. In terms of the program governance structure, as I mentioned earlier, the data showed a divergence in views related to the suitability of the steering committee composition, where some respondents reflected that the membership may not have been wholly fit for purpose. This was linked to a lack of clarity over the goal of the steering committee. Some members, for example, were felt to have limited experience and understanding of the constructs in which ProWash operates and of the countries in which RIFSAs were being delivered. So we wrote, as USAID advances its commitment to localizing aid, these findings suggest that this agenda can be gainfully applied to ProWash and possibly other technical support functions that provide specialist advisory services for the delivery of programs. It is clear that contextual knowledge or the ability to quickly understand and adapt to various contexts is imperative in the provision of technical support. Next slide, please. So the first points there reflect the findings that I've described. In terms of our recommendation, we then suggested that ProWash should consider investing in national technical experts or regional, if need be, to build cadres of technical specialists in countries that are likely to receive continued RIFSA support in the medium to long term. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. They are just some very top level or key highlights of the findings and recommendations from the report. As we've said, the report will be provided and it does go into a much greater detail looking at the various findings that emerged from the data. So we do recommend that you go out to access that report, and we do hope that you find it helpful. Thank you. At this point, if there are any questions, I'm very happy to respond. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda. I'd like to ask participants if you have any questions. We have a couple minutes reserved now. You can raise your hand or you can drop it in the chat box. I did want to mention, as Amanda said, the final report will be shared widely towards the end of this month. And there are the findings that you presented today, which are focused on today's discussion, but there's also a lot more findings around, the relevance of the activities, the tools, and different information in that full report that might be relevant to others working on capacity strengthening and learning. I don't think I see any comments or hands up right now, so I think we can continue. That being said, if a question pops in your head and you'd like to drop it in the chat box, please do go ahead and do that. So now we're going to use about the rest of the time to hear from you on how these findings resonate with your own work on WASH capacity strengthening and learning, and ideas of how we might, as a sector, learn from these. So first, we want to go back to the findings that Amanda talked about around governance and engagement with implementing partners. She talked a lot about some of the strengths, such as being a soundboard, expanding networks, providing technical review and input. But she also talked about some of these issues around a lack of clarity of the steering committee, the composition of the steering committee members, and some of the lack of clarity around time and expectations when one is co-leading a project together. And so we have here this overview of engagement, and recognize that within projects, many of you are probably familiar with this continuum around community engagement. We recognize that engagement can be a continuum that involves different levels, starting from inform, to consult, to involve, to collaborate, and to co-lead. So when we think about Pro-WASH and the different ways that you have engaged with Pro-WASH, you can probably think about it as being, maybe you were informed by Pro-WASH, maybe you just received a newsletter every month, or every few months you came across one of our resources, or perhaps you were at that level of co-leading with us through our steering committee. We recognize that increasing levels of engagement can ensure that we are more implementer focused and really tuned into what is needed by practitioners. At the same time, these increasing levels of engagement can also result in requests for more time and resources from partners who are in this position to collaborate or to co-lead with us. So for example, if we think at the inform level, you can sign up to receive our newsletter, and this is a really small amount of time that is required on a partner's part. They can sign up for the newsletter, they can receive it, they can read it. When we get to more the collaborate and the co-lead end of the continuum, such as when we had partners really inputting a lot into the design of a human-centered design resource center, they were participating in different stakeholder workshops. They were really helping to inform the design of that strategy, but that took many more hours and time than just being at that informed level. And then when we get to that higher level around steering committee, attending regular meetings, feeding in on strategies, this requires more time and more engagement. So thinking about this continuum, we'd like to hear from you, and thinking about different audiences that we have, what level of engagement is appropriate? If you put yourself in the shoes of a chief of party, what level of engagement is appropriate with ProWASH? If you think about a WASH program manager and WASH technical lead, what level of engagement is appropriate? And then thinking about the HQ or regional WASH advisor, what level of engagement is appropriate? And then finally, we have a fourth question, which is around national civil societies and local organizations. When you think about this continuum, the levels of engagement, the resources and time required, we'd like to hear from you, what would be appropriate in terms of engagement with these different actors when it comes to ProWASH. So I'm going to ask Suzanne now to open up AHA Slides so that we can get your feedback on the continuum of engagement. So you can see here, you can scan the QR code, or you can join on your phone or computer using the hyperlink in the chat box. Can we see the first question? Oh, great. So from your experience in thinking about the ProWASH activity, if you were a chief of party, what level of engagement is appropriate with ProWASH? And you can see in the continuum, there's different examples of what that level of engagement might look like. But there's also other ways that you could engage at an inform, consult, involve, collaborate, or co-lead level. Looks like we have 12 responses so far. It looks like a lot of respondents are saying collaborate or consult, and very few are saying involve, and none are saying inform or co-lead. So it's interesting to see the split between consulting chiefs of party or collaborating. Let's move on to the next question. If you're a WASH program manager, WASH technical lead, what level of engagement is appropriate? Okay. It looks like for the WASH program manager, we're split between involve and collaborate. So similar to the chief of party, there's interest in collaboration, but unlike the chief of party, we're looking at that involve level as well. On to the next one. If you were an HQ, headquarter or regional WASH advisor, essentially with this, we're talking about someone who's covering multiple countries or multiple projects in different areas. What level of engagement is appropriate? So here we're starting to see some information that HQ and regional WASH advisors are in a position, or that it would be appropriate to engage them at a co-lead level and or at the consult and involved level. Just give it another sec. There we go. And then finally, if you're a national civil society or local NGO partner, what level of engagement is appropriate? So we're seeing here again, co-leading, collaboration, and involving with, there's still some answers coming in. We have 10 of 17 who have voted, but it's starting to look like collaborate is where people think that there should be engagement. So when we look into the 4 different profiles, we found that chiefs of party, majority of those on the line think that we should be consulting and collaborating with chiefs of party. With the WASH tech leads, we should be consulting, involving, and collaborating. With those headquarter and regional WASH advisors, we should be co-leading, consulting, or involving. And then with the national civil society partner, we are looking more at involving, collaborating, and some co-leading. So I want to turn it over to Amanda to share your thoughts on how this engagement, continuum engagement, the findings look like in response to the evaluation finding.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks. I suppose my first reflection would be that there's quite a split in people's views on these issues. And I think that does reflect the data that we collected through the evaluation. And it reflects that this is a genuine debate within our sector. There's no right or wrong answer, which of course makes that quite difficult for technical assistant facilities like ProWASH to know exactly where they should engage with different stakeholders. So sorry to Pro-Wash in that regard, that there's no one clear direction for you to take forward. But I think in a way it does create the opportunity to continuously think about these things and to engage, particularly with implementing partners and RIFSers, as you think these things through. It's interesting how, even though there was a split, the focus did seem to shift across the spectrum rather than being at opposite ends of the spectrum for some of the respondents. So it perhaps suggests a direction with which people are leaning, depending on the different profiles of people who could be engaged. So perhaps that could support Pro-Wash and other technical assistance facilities to think through how they can respond to the feedback you've provided today. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda, for that. And I think that aspect around consensus building, what does it mean to be implementer-led, what level of engagement is appropriate, is really critical. I do want to mention too that we can go even beyond co-leading. We can focus on transformative engagement, so engaging participants with the goal of strategically addressing power imbalances and other systemic barriers to create sustainable change, or even self-mobilizing, so support participants in their leadership and direction of their own activities. But for the purposes of Pro-Wash, we're working in a project, in the context of a project where a time-limited award, we were focusing on those levels of engagement as it comes to a project like ours. Next slide. So we wanted to hear a little bit from you around, what does it mean to be implementer-led? There were different votes on how much engagement you'd like to have with us, or depending on the different profiles, what type of engagement would be appropriate. And what are some governance models of projects that have achieved these goals? So if you're comfortable, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself and let us hear your thoughts on any of these three questions. Or you can type your answer in the chat box. And we'd just like to take a couple more minutes to reflect on this theme before we move on to our theme around convening and collaboration. I'd be curious to hear thoughts, especially around, how can barriers to effective engagement be overcome? Many of you voted that, we should be co-leading with different parties. At the same time, we have to recognize that that is, time and resources that partners are giving to co-lead with us. And so, thinking of my own work when I've volunteered to be on different committees, it's often hard to find that engagement and that balance between, your other work and effective engagement. So curious to hear, what are your thoughts to overcome some of these barriers to really ensure effective engagement? I just had the thought that I'm experiencing a barrier to effective engagement right now. I feel we're a little bit in this inform and consult stage, during this webinar, and how, we want to collaborate and hear from you on your thoughts on these different questions. So thank you to Precious and Jude, who are starting to drop things in the chat box. Let's see, we have make engagement part of the award terms, inform AORs of expectations of engagement supporting that. Good point around digital platforms such as Zoom or MS Teams. Do they work well, or how can we improve them? Implementer-led informed decision-making based on context and contextual knowledge of INGOs and local partners, ensuring that implementing partners are involved through research and capacity building process. Lessons learned should strongly inform existing projects to strengthen, adapt, or shift focus. I think opportunities to be more comfortable using tools like DEPL to help strengthen opportunities for cross-linguistic engagement. Great, thanks for these points. Does anyone have a shining star when they think about governance models of projects that have really achieved these goals? Any projects that come to mind that really have embodied what it means to be implementer-led and to have really true engagement? Great. If other questions or if other thoughts to these points come to mind, please go ahead and drop them in the chat box. We're going to move on to our second theme, which is around collaboration and convening. Next slide. So with collaboration and convening, we were looking at the evaluation findings and thinking about our role as collaborators and conveners, but also thinking about, what does make for a strong collaboration? What is what role can a project play like ProWash, and what are some factors? So we looked at some of the recent research that was done by the Sustainable Wash Systems Learning Partnership, and they looked at several pathways for collaboratively strengthening water and sanitation systems. The research indicated that collaborative approaches are really dynamic and depend on context. They require consensus on a shared vision. And so this goes back to the point Amanda made around engagement. We do need to have a shared vision around what level of engagement is appropriate and who we should engage at different stages and different levels. It requires an entity that initiates, convenes, and manages the collaborative approaches, and requires committed membership where members show up consistently and feel accountable to carry out the actions assigned to them, and that it has this suitable structures and processes for functioning. So these are some of what we know around collaboration within the WASH sector, but we would like to hear from you again on AHA Slides. The QR will show up, and we'd like to hear from you on if you agree or disagree or are neutral on a couple of questions. In my experience, WASH partners often operate in silos. And the second question, in my experience, an intermediary like ProWash is helpful for cross-partner learning and breaking down silos. Great. So this one looks like no one has answered disagree, which is great. Some people answered neutral and most, oh, sorry, no, that's the opposite of what sorry. Let's see. Most people, no one answered disagreed, meaning that everyone agreed that WASH partners operate in silos, which is not a great thing. That is not a great thing. But when it comes to, the goals we're trying to achieve, and if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the need for collaboration and convening, some people answered neutral, and most people agreed that WASH partners often operate in silos. Next. In my experience, an intermediary like ProWASH is helpful for cross-partner learning and breaking down silos. We're seeing a lot of agrees here. Next question. And then we want to hear from you on, how can projects like ProWASH support systems for useful, inclusive, and sustainable collaboration and convening? And here you can vote for, I think, as many as you'd like. What modalities do you find most useful for collaborating and convening? There is some overlap with when we think about the continuum engagement and these modalities for collaboration and convening. And I think this goes back to some of the questions in the chat box as well, or comments around, overcoming barriers, virtual platforms versus in-person opportunities. So we're seeing here webinars, conference and workshops, co-facilitation of training, working together on research, emails. We're saying that online office hours are not where we should go, and that social media websites and newsletters seem low too, although we have only about a third of the votes in so far. Okay. Great. So as we close on that question, I think we wanted to throw one more question out today for discussion, which is, what are your suggestions for engaging national technical expertise? And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. How can mechanisms like ProWASH be implementer-led and still introduce new knowledge and ideas to implementers? So curious to hear your thoughts on this or on any of the points we discussed today in the last 3 minutes that we have set aside for today's workshop. Amanda, any thoughts on those ways of engagement and those silos and thinking back to the evaluation findings?
Thanks, Nicole. I would just say I think that the responses we've received today very much align with the responses we obtained through the evaluation. So in a sense, that's reinforcing that learning and highlighting our need to think that through. And it's great to see that there's some guidance there on kind of specific modalities through which ProWash can build on that learning. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Amanda. So I think I don't see any hands up. Curious to hear your thoughts on these questions, or if things come to mind after this workshop, we'd be happy to sit down and have a virtual coffee with you and dig in deeper on any of these topics that Amanda and ProWash discussed today. So I think for today, we will go ahead and thank everyone for participating. I also want to thank everyone who took time to fill out the practitioner survey as part of the ProWash final evaluation, or who participated in a focus group or interview. In the coming weeks, we'll be sharing the full evaluation report and the readout from this event. And again, thank you so much to Amanda and Causal Design for producing the final evaluation and the final evaluation reports. We're really looking forward to continuing to apply the findings. I do want to give it to Precious, as I saw that her hand has been raised. Go ahead, Precious.
Yes, hi, everyone. My name is Precious Danko with USAID BHA. Nicole, I was just wondering, I mean, these are great questions, and I think probably people need to kind of take some time and digest the questions to respond. So I was wondering if it could be sent out, and not everyone is here, so it could be sent out widely just to get more of a broader feedback on those specific questions that you had. So just food for thought on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. And that's another way to make it more accessible. I know not everyone was able to attend today. So yes, we can go ahead and do that. Thanks. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and looking forward to staying in touch on this. And we'll share the questions and the report, of course, later this month. Thanks, and thanks again, Amanda. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.